Hello, and welcome to the session called Communication for Learning, Supporting Students as They Learn. My name is Denise Carew, and I am a Senior Instructional Designer with CITL, and I will be hosting, chairing, and facilitating this session for you. Note that this session was provided live with participants in the session. This particular session is a recording of that session, so there are no participants today in this recording, but some of the content that came out of that live session, some of the questions and so on, will be part of this recorded session. Just to do a quick overview of the session description, this session is designed to help you, the instructor, with frequent, timely, and clear communications with students, and it's particularly focused, or it was thought necessary, especially in remote and online courses, where sometimes communication needs to be more planned and thought out versus sort of on-the-fly kind of communication that you may have in your face-to-face courses. We will also talk about some challenges and opportunities that you may have with some of the tools that are available to you in the LMS and other applications. So this session was designed to be a very learner-centered session. So the focus is on you, the instructor, and what you will need in terms of communication to help you communicate successfully with your students so that they can learn the most from your course. And we will be talking quite a bit about the what and the how, or the what and the how of communication, and using some of the principles and tools of communication. And there will be some demonstrations as requested by the participants that were in the session. So the first thing we did in the live session was that we asked these 3 questions. And so it was important to kind of really understand some of the challenges that instructors face when communicating. It's important to kind of make sure we fully understand, in order for this to be learner-centered, we had to fully understand what the participants were hoping to attain from the session. So we asked that question. And we gave an opportunity for some general questions. So next I'm going to share with you the Padlet that we used and some of the comments that were placed in that, or all of the comments that were placed in that Padlet. And it will be worthy to note that all of the comments are anonymous. So that was designed purposefully to get the maximum participation, and also so that we could share those comments with other people that might like to see the presentation. So I'll share with you that now. So this is the Padlet that we use, and you can see the 3 questions at the top here. What are you hoping to learn from the session? What communication challenges do you face in your course? And what are some of the general comments or questions that you might have? So if you'd like to stop the presentation now and review some of those questions and comments there, you can feel free to do so. And I basically I stopped this Padlet after about 5 minutes, and we will go back now and do some of the presentation in the session, which will cover off some of the questions that were asked here. So one of the first things that instructors can do in terms of communication is to provide the critical information up front. And one of the ways that you can do that is through a course syllabus. The course syllabus is a great communication tool, and it's critical that you look at that course syllabus. It can be looked at as a contract between students, But I like to look at it more as a really good, solid communication tool between the instructor and students. The syllabus, in the syllabus, organization is key. Information should be easy to find, and information should really only be in one place. You can have links back and forth to some of the information, but if a student is looking for information such as due dates, for example, or explanations about an evaluation or an assessment, then they should know where to go and find that. And one of the questions we got in the Padlet was how to make email a little bit more manageable. And there was a lot of questions from students sometimes in some courses. And so if the students know that they can find information easily, they know exactly where to get it, and they know that it's only in one place, then they will be more likely to go into the syllabus to find that information. We often hear also of instructors saying that the information is there, but the students don't look at the syllabus. They prefer to ask the question. And so one of the things that we mentioned to instructors as a possibility is using a syllabus quiz. And I'll show you an example of a syllabus quiz in a moment. But basically, a syllabus quiz allows students to go through the syllabus, answer some questions that might be in a quiz, and so it allows them to become familiar with the policy's expectations, the format, the evaluation scheme, and so on. And you can give participation marks for completing the quiz. But more importantly, you can explain to students that it is a really good opportunity for them to become familiar with the syllabus, so that will help them in their studies. So I'm going to pause now and bring you out to show you an example of a syllabus quiz. Okay, so here is one example of a syllabus quiz. You can see that there are 21 questions in this quiz. You can see very off the get-go here, the first question, it's fairly light. It's got some options there that make it a little bit fun. But more importantly, as you go through the quiz, you can see that there's some very specific questions that the instructor wants to ensure that the students were able to review those sections. So sections about the evaluation plan, the final exam, for example, are all there. Questions about discussion, so the expectations about discussions will be there. Some general information about how students should participate. So question 6 here is about how they're encouraged to think critically about the course materials. Some very specific questions are in the quiz. You can ask students to do this as an open book quiz so that they can go back and forth to the syllabus. It also has the advantage that it gives them a little opportunity to work inside the quiz tool. And so that is an added bonus. Another tool that we can create in our courses to help students get organized and to actually communicate upfront, a communication tool that we can build so that students can have something that they refer to whenever they're looking for something like due dates or what they're supposed to be working on in a given week. So I'll show you an example of a course schedule at a glance for a course that had a fairly complicated assignment. Each assignment had multiple parts. So having the course schedule and having the due dates for each of those parts was very important. But again, this is another example where it's communication with students about what they're expected to do and when things are due and so on. It's done up front, and it will reduce some of the questions that you may get from students about things like due dates and so on. So this is an example of a weekly schedule, what I like to call a course at a glance or a course schedule at a glance. And you can see the headings here, that we have the week, the topic, student responsibilities in terms of discussions and readings, when things are due for submission. And this particular one has 3 different phases for the assignment: the submit phase, the assess and provide feedback phase, and the reflect phase. This was a peer review course that relied on peer review quite heavily. So in here, students can go to the week, find when things are due, and at the bottom here and in other places, they can note that when exactly each phase or each part of the assignment is due. So this really provides a good overview for students about the topic, what they're expected to do, and the due dates. So those are a couple of tools that you can use for upfront, proactive communication that you can have completed before the course even starts and that students can access on a regular basis. But you may also want to have some just-in-time communication opportunities. In your class, if you have a class 3 times a week, face-to-face, for example, there are plenty of opportunities for that face-to-face communication, opportunities for students to ask questions and for you to provide information to them directly. If you are doing more remote, or perhaps you only have one face-to-face class per week, or it's a fully online course, then there are other options that you can use for just-in-time communication. One is the announcements tool, which will be on the front. It's in a widget on the course home page for your course. And you can put announcements in for students in this announcements tool. You can remind them of certain things that are happening in the course. You can provide logistical information, for example, links to certain information that you may not have in your course content. You can put information about course cancellations, for example, storm days. And you may also want to do a weekly comment in the announcements tool. So some people asked about anxiety and stress and how to help students relieve that. And so having that regular communication with students in a comment, perhaps a very positive and warm welcome to the week and maybe a close off for the week or one or the other. Some of those can really help to alleviate stress for students. And so the announcements tool is a good opportunity to do that. You can also use the course email tool. And one way to use that, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment, is through the class list, and you can email one student individually or multiple students. There was a question in the Padlet about, or in the chat, in the live session about using course email versus MUN email or personal email. And my advice is to use the Brightspace course email. And the reason is that all of the emails will be captured directly in that course, in the context of the course, and you can access them at any time. Plus, for very large classes, email can get a little unwieldy in your personal email, and so it's nice to keep it separated from your personal email. And finally, it's easy to email a certain student based on some of the content that's in the course. You can email groups of students, and you can email the entire class. So if you have a very large class, like 200 students, for example, the course email definitely will help in that situation. And finally, for just-in-time communication, you can use the discussion forum. So students can share information with each other and can communicate with each other in something like a student cafe. Or you can have a discussion forum that is for instructor information. So if there are updates, logistical kinds of updates or clarifications that you may want to make, and for example, if a student emailed you with a question and you want to make that answer available to everyone, you can use a discussion forum and keep it in there. And then let students know from time to time that there is new information in that forum that they may want to see. Another way that you may want to communicate with students, and again, to address specific students, to alleviate some stress and anxiety that they may have, is to offer office hours. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. If you're in a face-to-face and you have access to a physical office, certainly you can let students know when you will be available, and that's standard practice. But we also have the online rooms and WebEx tools in Brightspace that you could use for office hours. Online rooms does not have a provision for setting up specific meetings with students, although you can do that using a different tool. But you can make yourself available online for specific times during the week, just as you would if you had an office that you could use. In WebEx, you can schedule, you can set up meetings or appointments, and students can block out a specific time to meet with you. And so that may be useful because you know exactly who you're meeting with, you may know why, and so you can prepare for that. And also it's a very personal space, so no other students would be in the meeting room at that particular time. You can also do an open office hours for students, and you can invite TAs to that office hours as well if they want to do some sort of a tutorial or something along those lines. And in the meetings and also in online rooms or Bongo, you can create breakout rooms. So that will add a level of privacy. So if you wanted to meet with one student at a time individually, you could break out into a breakout room with that student and have a private discussion. And the final thing that I wanted to mention about communication is communication that is very specific to your course content. And I'll show you a couple of examples, or one example of a page in Brightspace that you could create for communication. So some of the key things that we like to communicate in our courses would be the course learning goals and the module level or unit level outcomes. So it's really important that students can see what the course goals are, what they're learning, what they're supposed to be working toward, what the outcomes should be. And without that, sometimes it is very difficult for students to focus on what it is they're learning and why it is that they're reading a specific thing or watching something. Another thing that may be difficult to do in a remote or a fully online course would be to provide examples and advice from your perspective. So in a face-to-face course, you may get questions from students and you may provide some advice on how they might handle a situation, or you may provide an example of how you approach something or a tool you might use, for example, like that. When you don't have that face-to-face communication, it is a little bit more difficult and it may have to be done proactively. So I'll show you an example of how you could design a course page in Brightspace to include some examples and advice. Instructor feedback is another key communication aspect of communication, and you can build in some feedback through the tools that you use. For example, the quiz tool and the assignments tool and the discussion tool, lots of opportunity for feedback. You can provide general feedback to the entire class using the announcements tool, for example. But you can also create activities where the feedback is kind of built in. So simple activities, for example, if you wanted a student to be able to explain to a friend, and I'll show you an example like that in a moment, then you may create a simple activity for them to do where they actually have to explain something. And then the feedback is kind of automatic, because if they can't explain that concept, then they know that they don't understand it deeply enough. So having some communication around that directly in your course pages can be quite useful. And information about the course content that you've selected. So for example, if you have video in your course or you have readings, then using some instructional text around that to let students know why they're watching a particular thing, what it is they're watching in the first place, and why it's important and what they might want to do with that information. So rather than just putting in a video, having some instructional text and introduction to it and so on is quite helpful. So next I'm going to pause and show you an example page that has some of the information that's listed here directly on a content page. So this is an example page of content from a course, and the content is here in the white and some images and so on. And then we have some boxes that are shaded here in a different color. This can be done in various ways so that they pop out and students can see it. So you can see that the instructor has put some advice in here from his or her perspective. So even though this is an online course, the advice and that communication can go directly in the course. We also have a video here, and you can see some instructional text at the top, which introduces the video a little bit, asks students to pay attention to a particular piece of the video, and gets them to hone in on a specific thing, and that is why Michael Phelps is saying that goal setting is imperative. So it kind of sets up the video rather than just putting it in the context of the rest of the content. Down a little bit more, we have more instructor examples, another instructor example and some instructor advice. We have a little bit of practice. This is not it's just a practice activity. And again, this could be something that you communicate in your face-to-face course, where you ask students to pause and just maybe do a little practice exercise, and you can embed that directly in here. So this is a form of communication that you can use. There's some notes, critical information that the instructor wanted to highlight. And then at the bottom, there's a to-do. So this is more of an assessment type of to-do, but again, it's a way of communicating to the students, specifically within the context of the content. So that concluded the presentation part of the session. There were some questions in chat that we addressed. And then we finished the session with coming back to these 3 questions. And some of the questions were already addressed in the presentation. We did talk a little bit about group work. We talked about a couple of tools that we can use for group work. And one of those tools is peer review. So we can create group work assignments in peer review and have students work directly in there. We also have a tool called video assignment, which is part of Bongo. And in video assignment, students can work in groups. They can schedule meetings for themselves as groups, and they can meet in online rooms, record that session, and the recorded version of that session goes directly in video assignment for the instructor. Students can then also post things like recorded video that they may have recorded outside of Bongo, PowerPoints, any types of files, images, and so on, as part of a larger presentation or assignment for you. We also, in the blue here on the bottom, we were asked about having students producing videos instead of writing papers. And the discussion about that, even though it's a little bit different than communication, it is a way, something that you may want to communicate with students, and that is providing students with options for their assignments. So we are in full agreement that video is a good option. It certainly is context dependent. So you may need to look at the type of course that you have and so on and so forth. But in most cases, we are proponents of using video as an option of providing a paper versus just a written paper. But it would certainly depend on the context of the course and so on. In general, having evaluation and communicating the opportunities for flexibility in evaluation, for options, so video, for example, versus written, is a very positive thing for students. And when we talk about, here in the pink, you'll see about stress and anxiety, we see that there is a certain alleviation of stress and anxiety when students have options and they're not forced into one way of completing the course. We did not talk about meaningful self-assessment, but we did mention that there are some tools. And again, the quiz tool that we looked at for the syllabus quiz can be used for self-assessment. We talked about some active learning, for example, some minute papers, maybe tell a friend, where the feedback is directly involved, so we can do a self-assessment and the students get immediate feedback. We can use the survey tool as well. And so there are some self-assessment tools baked into Brightspace that can be used for self-assessment. And just to conclude, one of the key things is that constant communication that you would have. So the proactive communication that we mentioned with creating communication directly up front is really important. And also using some just-in-time communication tools with students will be equally important. So it's important that you plan for communication, that you provide lots of information for students, and that everything is well laid out so students can find what they're looking for. I hope you enjoyed the session. If you have any questions or comments or need further information, please email me at dcarew@mun.ca. Thank you.